You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
There's no way around it. Property taxes, they are going up. I have so many conversations with people where it goes, I've gained like 200 grand in equity in my home, or maybe it's 100 or whatever. Maybe it's 50 grand. And then when the assessor sends out their tax statement saying, hey, here's what your assessed value is, people freak out and go, I don't want to pay more taxes. You can't have it both ways, unfortunately. So when you got this hot market, this is one more thing people don't really consider. They don't really want to consider. That's because it's painful, because it's going to cost more when your tax bill comes from the county that you're in. So when you get that tax bill, know that, okay, yep, I'm going to have to pay some more taxes, but at some point in time, I get to cash in and make that money. The difficult part about having increasing equity is that you can't really spend it until you sell the property. You can get a line of credit, but then you're basically borrowing your own equity. So you can do that to provide a little bit of liquidity. But I think the hard thing for most folks is man, this tax increase doesn't fit within the budget. And if you're a renter, you're already probably facing some increased rent. This is one more thing that's going to stack on top of all the other stuff we've had during the pandemic that's causing your rents to go up. This is one more factor, is rising property values. Landlords, they're going to want to recoup increasing taxes as well, right? They're going to put it right back on the tenants. Your rents are going to go up. You're going to see that a lot in the coming months as far as storylines, and people are going to be freaking out because the amount of appreciation across the U.S. in so many markets has just been, it's been so consistent and it's been so high over the last year. Now, one of the things about assessed values is that it's typically on a rolling 3-year basis. It's not like, your property values went up 20%, your assessed value is going to go up 20%. No, it's averaged over 3 years. But we're coming into some time periods where the assessed values are going to go up pretty sharply, and people are literally going to freak out and go, what happened? Well, you know how you were talking to your neighbor about how much you could sell your houses for? That happened. All right, that's what we're going to get into today. Before we do, if you're new here, my name is Sean Reynolds, and I own a couple of real estate companies, and I read the news you might not find anywhere else, or at least a perspective on the news you're not going to find in a lot of places. All right, let's get into it. This is from the Capitol Hill Seattle blog. And I'm taking just a local news story, but this applies to just about anywhere because taxation's about the same. You determine the assessed value, and your local assessor does that. And then you've got millage rate, which is all the taxes that you voted in. And you've got take the assessed value, take it by a percentage, and that's what the assessed value is based on. Say your home value is 500 grand, and you have 90% is your assessed value percentage. So the county assessor assigns a value, and then they say, okay, but for assessed purposes, we're only going to do it at 90%. So you take off 10%, 50 grand, you're down to 450 grand. You multiply that by your millage rate, and those are all the taxes, all the local and state and all those other good taxes that you voted in. And that is where the real either high or low cost of taxes comes in. It's what you vote in. It's not necessarily your assessed value. Assessed value has a little bit of impact to it, and I'll talk about that some more from the appraisal standpoint a little bit later here in this podcast. But your millage rate is kind of where you either pay a lot or a little, or, relative to other communities in your area. That's where your taxation comes in. And so when you have those assessed values going up, you're just going to pay more in taxes. So this article starts off with, sorry, kids, it's not getting any easier to buy a home in Seattle. County property values continue to rise, and 2 Seattle neighborhoods, including Capitol Hill, led the way in 2020. Now, one of the reasons I want to read this article is because everybody was like, oh, okay, after CHOP is done, everything's just going to be a bloodbath. Property values are going to tank. Well, actually, Capitol Hill led the way for King County in assessed value. The median price of assessed value is increasing. The office says median residential property values rose by 7.9% on Capitol Hill and by 11.3% in the Ravenna University District area in 2020. Keep in mind, these are rolling averages over a 3-year period, right? So it's not like for that year, because appreciation has been far, far greater than that for just the year. The message comes as the assessor is preparing homeowners and landlords for sticker shock as the annual process of mailing property valuation notices to taxpayers begins. Assessor John Wilson says reluctance to sell by existing property owners is helping drive the continued surge. Yeah, that is one small segment, but we had limited supply going into the pandemic. We cranked down those interest rates. We put a massive focal point on housing as people had to hunker down and do their thing in place. Those are more the factors than reluctance by existing property owners. So don't believe everything that you see in the media. That's not really the major driving factor here. And the fact that you've got tons of businesses coming in and expanding their workforce, creating even further demand for housing, for said housing. Because if you look at Capitol Hill, you would say, well, it's not because of reluctant homeowners. It's because everybody still wants to live there, believe it or not. They do. It's true. Capitol Hill, CHOP. A lot of people saw videos that I shot during CHOP or Chaz, however you want to call it. And they're like, what about all the cranes in that area? Yeah, they were literally finishing up construction. I would circle CHOP around a couple of streets and alleyways. And on one alleyway on the western side, on the northwestern side of Cal Anderson Park of CHOP, I would always run into a bunch of construction workers, and you could just tell. I mean, these are some blue collar guys doing a tough job. And, they're making decent money, but they're working hard. And they would look at all these knuckleheads that are protesting in CHOP who obviously didn't have jobs. And they were just disgusted. And they were disgusted that their equipment was getting graffitied. And, they're trying to build out a new community. In that new community, those areas, some big mid-size high-rises got built out during CHOP. The show didn't stop. It just kept going. And so it was this wild contrast between building new stuff and just tearing stuff down, because that's what the peaceful protesters did. Graffitiing things up, making them look terrible, tearing things apart, destroying things, versus building new communities for people to live in. Well, Capitol Hill, it did pretty well. Top of the heap. Ravenna in the University District area in 2020, that was the number 2, and that went up by 11.3%. And we just had a shooting in the Ravenna district. Did we have a shoot? Yeah, we had a shooting outside of a homeless encampment, and the University District has had some pretty big homeless sweeps. So even when you talk about all these crazy things happening in the Seattle market, you've got these home prices just skyrocketing. So it's this weird kind of thing where a lot of people looking in from the outside who don't run the numbers on a daily basis, they're like, "Oh, Seattle's going to tank. It's just going to go right in the crapper. It's good." And then people are going to scoop up deals in the end. That's not happening. So we're back to Assessor John Wilson. No one knew what to expect a little over a year ago when this public health emergency began, Wilson said in an announcement. Now it is clear that a primary impact on property values has been caused by homeowners not wanting to sell at this time, leading to reduced supply and big price and value increases. Well, you have to have the demand component in order for that to really make sense, right? If there's no demand for housing, it doesn't really matter if homeowners sell or don't, right? They can put their house in the market. It'll just sit there. There won't be this feeding frenzy. You've got this massive demand component. Interest rates are low. People want bigger homes. People are relocating. They're coming into the area. They want to live close to areas that have a lot going on. I don't believe the whole thing where everybody's going to the burbs. No, That's not a thing. And especially right now, you're seeing kind of a resurgence back into these downtown areas. I'm told in Portland, not so much. That is an exception because we all kind of know what happened in downtown Portland. And it's going to take a while for them to kind of work their way through that one. If they do, especially given current leadership, they're going to have a tough time revitalizing Portland. Even though they placed that big ad in the New York Times saying, Portland's quirky, we're fun, we're just, we've got a little bit of our own attitude. They placed that ad and people are like, you're still not going there. Not going there. A lot of people say the same thing about Seattle. Yeah, still not going there. And I don't really blame you. We've got some bad PR. And you're just going to have to take that when you've got ridiculous things going on in your markets, like a Chop and Chaz deal. So John Wilson, his office says that home sale prices and overall home values have risen sharply in most King County neighborhoods, despite the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. County assessors set values annually on every commercial and residential property value in the state. Effective as of January 1st by state law, the values are then applied to next year's tax bill. So my significant other is an assessor at the King County Assessor's Department. I've got a bunch of friends there. I've got Summit brokers who hang their license with Summit Properties Northwest and are also assessors, which is not a conflict of interest. They just can't sell anything in King County because, I'm going to assess that really low and then I'll sell it later high, that whole thing. You can't do that. But I've had former appraisers when the market absolutely tanked in the Great Recession, when appraisal fees were $250, $350, and now they're like $1,000, $1,100, $1,200, kind of all day long, because with governmental regulation, you shrunk the supply of appraisers, and appraisers are getting old and retiring, and there aren't any new appraisers coming in because it's a very difficult industry to get into. Appraisers like myself don't want to train new people because the economics just don't make sense with the way regulations are set up. So a lot of the folks that I know that I talk to, they're assessors. They're on the front line. They have to go through the hearings when people want to, when they want to they want to say that their property values, they're not quite that high. They're disputing their property values. So one of the big misnomers is, well, if I can get my property value down a little bit with the assessor's office, my taxes will go down a lot. No, you can have a big drop in your assessed value, and the overall portion that gets applied to the millage rate, that stays about the same. You're not going to reduce your taxes by all that much. And how do I know this? Because I've been asked to do literally thousands of appraisals. My assessed value is too high. And I'll take a quick 5-minute look and I'll go, yeah, that's pretty much right in line with the market. County did a pretty good job. I can do an appraisal, but it's probably going to be higher than what you're hoping for. And they're like, well, what happened? My property values, my assessed value went up so much. I'm like, okay, before the year started, what do you think you could sell it for? Well, about that. Well, what do you think you could sell it for now? A lot more. You can't have it both ways. When property values go up, when you can sell your home for more, your property values are based on mass valuation techniques. And they basically look at comparable sales over a running 3-year average. And that's the way King County does it. Other areas do it slightly differently, but it's all based on about the same thing. It's comparable sales data within your neighborhood. And people want to say, well, we used to have a view and then these trees grew up. Yeah, it's going to maybe impact it by a little bit, but probably not much. And then you've got the whole deal where, well, my neighbor had this valuation and I got this one. It's like, okay, but it's not that much different. And if you look at your millage rate and you figure out how to figure out your actual taxes, you'll realize that a slight drop in your assessed value isn't going to do you jack. So I often tell people, hey, I can do this appraisal for you, but it's not going to do you any good. Oftentimes what we find is the areas where you've got the biggest opportunity to reduce your taxes is if somebody or through the course of data keeping at the county level if they've made a mistake somewhere. If you've had a big remodel or, your property values are probably going to go up if they haven't caught that and they finally catch that. The permit somebody actually sees that. The county's pretty good at trying to get an accurate picture of your home. And so, but if something's going on, say you've got a foundation that's sliding, something like that, that's really going to impact your value. County's not going to know that by just running around the outside and taking a quick peek, because you're not letting the county into your house every year, are you? To kind of take a peek around and, what's going on here? What do we have here? So if there are things that, or maybe the tax records, maybe the original plans for your home included another 500 square feet and maybe a master suite that it actually didn't have when it got built, something along those lines. If there's an actual physical issue with your home that's incorrect on the tax records, that can have a big impact. But for the most part, even if you send in an appraisal that is a little bit lower than your assessed value, the county is basically going to say, yeah, that's their opinion. This is ours. This is our game. We win. So you've really got to have something that points out, hey, here's where your valuation methodology is incorrect. Maybe you're on a busier street, or a street has gotten much busier due to traffic flow for whatever reason. Tax records don't pick that up. You could argue that. But it's got to be a pretty specific reason, because most property tax value disputes don't work out in favor of the homeowner because they're not reasonable. People say, well, my house actually has 2 fireplaces, not 3. I need my property values dropped. My taxes should drop. Doesn't have any impact at all. Nobody cares. Well, my house doesn't have AC and my next door neighbor's does. Nobody cares. You're in Seattle. We don't really ever turn on the ACs until we need them. And then we really bitch when we don't have them. So you got to be reasonable with a lot of this stuff. And the fact that the markets have gone through the roof as far as appreciation goes, you're going to see some pretty big taxation increases as well. And that will be a big, big storyline here, because that's going to raise rents on top of that. And people are going to have the further argument of, well, we've got an affordability issue crisis. Yeah, you do. But that doesn't have any impact on this process. This process, it is what it is. And if you've got rising sales prices and rising median home values and mean home values and all that good stuff, you're going to have rising taxes as well. So it's interesting when people get their tax thing and then they just freak out and go, oh, but this can't be. My taxes have never gone up this much. All right. Yeah. Has your property values gone up this much in the marketplace ever? Well, no. All right. That's just how this works. So you got to have kind of a reasonable approach to this and know that, okay, everything's going up in price. I did, what did I do? I did an inflation podcast, I think yesterday, and it was the, what was it? New York Fed survey. I think it was talking about inflation. I mean, everything's going up in price. So, and we know property values have, and they've gone up in value across the United States. And not every community, not every market. There have been some markets that have less demand, and typically that's due to an economic deal or something specific. Say if you've got an employer who's shut down in an area or an industry that has been shut down, something along those lines can impact things heavily as well. But for the most part, man, property values across the U.S., they went to the moon over this last year, didn't they? And then in 2021, we've been off to the races. And so unfortunately, byproduct, your taxes are going to be off to the races. And then that accordingly, for everybody who are renters, that's going to be another reason for increased rent. And so you're going to see everything kind of rise on up. And we see this every single cycle when we have kind of on what I typically indicate as the tail end of a cycle. But I don't think we're in the tail end of a cycle right now. I think we've just had this massive amount of just basically gasoline poured on the fire, and the flames have just risen really high, and now they're going to go back to kind of normal height, because you still don't have any supply in the marketplace, and you don't have any ability to increase that supply. The whole upzoning thing, yeah, that's not going to work. Trying to build new houses. We've been trying to build more houses since the beginning of the Great Recession. How's that going? Not well. Give you a hint. Because as fast as those builders build those homes, they get sold. And who do those homes get sold to? People with money that can afford new versus existing home stock. So it's always going to be the cream of the crop. So unless you put some pretty massive incentives in there for people to build affordable housing, you're not going to have enough housing to cover all the masses. You're just not. It's not a thing. And then people are going to complain, but what about affordable housing? Okay. And you tell me, you try and figure that out. How are you going to get some? And there are pockets of affordable housing out there, and there are projects and things like that. But for the vast majority of stuff that's built, for the vast majority of stuff that's converted, builders are it's highest and best use. What is the highest use that property will bring in the marketplace? That's what gets built. That's what gets sold. And, that's kind of just how this goes. So unfortunately, I think we're in for, like this article says, sticker shock. I think you're going to see some of that. And so just be aware that when your tax statement does come through, or your increase in rent does come through, this is not something that should be shocking. It should be like, okay, there it finally is. That's really annoying, but I got a budget for that. Just like I got a budget for the increase in groceries and everything else. What hasn't gone up? I mean, ticket prices to the movies, nothing has dropped. Has anything dropped? I can't really think of anything. Has anything gone down lower? I don't think so. And we're kind of getting so beat up and used to, all right, that's more. My Slurpee at 7-Eleven is more. That sucks, but I get it. My Monster is more at 7-Eleven. Gasoline, that kind of goes up and down like a yo-yo, doesn't it? Because that stuff just those markets to me are just crazy. It's like, really? Your output went up and price went up and yeah, interesting. All right. So when your tax statement comes, don't be shocked when you open it and go, holy cow, how did this happen? Now you know. And, if you think you want to try, and if you've got a situation, if you want to hit me up with a really unique situation on your home, email it to me, Sean at seattlerealestatepodcast.com. And Sean is SEAN. Can't tell you how many people I have hit me up with messages and emails. That guy that does the real estate podcast. I'm not going to respond if you don't reference me by first and last name. If you don't put in the time to figure out my name, you get the delete, because I'm not really going to work with somebody who doesn't know my name. That's just a simple business concept. But I get pitched offers all the time to do advertising and, hey, let's do this together and let's do this beneficial relationship. And most of the time I look at it and go, well, that benefits you and not me. So delete. But if you have a concept, or if you have an idea, hey, my property values should go down because of this, email it to me. I'll tell you what I think, because that's kind of what I've done for a living for the last 30 years. And most of the time, I've had a couple of cases where assessed values have been dropped and reduced. And it usually wasn't because I came in with an appraisal that was super low. It's because I pointed out something with my appraisal that differed from what the tax records had as property characteristics. Simple as that. So oftentimes, if you're in a battle with the county on assessed value, you're not going to win, because it's you hire an appraiser. Okay, but you're the homeowner. You obviously have an interest in getting that property value lower. So you hired your hired gun. The county has their professionals that go out and do this all day, every day, all year long. And they came up with a valuation not only on that one specific home, but the entire community, all the neighbors, and that county, every home, every building. in that, county. So that's what they do. And so they are going to say, well, here's what our assessor came up with. And if you get into it, you might have a hearing and you might argue back and forth. And the assessor has to show up, the owner or their attorney has to show up. And sometimes it'll go to an arbitration type hearing and it'll get sorted out there. But oftentimes that whole process, you know what it results in? Not a lot. Not a lot. So be reasonable when you get your tax statement. All right, did my house property values go up a lot? They did. I could sell my house for way more. If that's the case, all right, my assessed value, I know that's a tricky one. That's a lot. And my taxes are going to go up. Just kind of know it going into these things, that this is where we're at. This is the system. We live in a society. We have rules. This is the way it goes. All right. That's it for me on this one. I think I've killed this as we sit right now, but just know that if you get those higher tax notices, don't freak out. Try and mitigate it by thinking happy thoughts of flowers and sunsets and bunny rabbits, something like that. I don't know. Not a lot you can do. That's the bottom line. All right. Thanks so much for being here, part of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I'll catch up with you guys soon. Until then, stay safe. We'll see you then. Bye. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.